So this is for, I mean, space. So SSEC is Space Science Engineering Center.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of research with NSF,
NOAA, NASA. It's a whole mostly meteorological studies, atmosphere science. My team specifically, we process satellite data from the SNPP and NOAA 20 satellites.
And how much data does that bring down a day about?
Ingest a day is about 700 gigs, but we produce about 1.5 terabytes of products every day.
Okay. So in the type of data that you're bursting to AWS, is that the satellite data, or is that other different types of research?
Yeah, that's like the satellite data, because we work with the science algorithm teams, and they occasionally send us new updated algorithms. So we have these reprocessing runs that we do. And just as a test, we wanted to see if we could burst it out to AWS. That's what we did. It worked really smooth because we used a site-to-site VPN. So it was really just once you had the routing in, it was like you're running on your local network. The only big bottleneck was the AWS VPN appliance is limited to, I think, 1.5 gigabits of throughput, which kept us limited. This was a pretty network light job that we were running, so it limited us to like 800 to 1,000 cores at a time in AWS.
That's pretty amazing there.
Yeah.
When did you start doing this?
It's just a demo we did last year, probably about 9-10 months ago. It's really only worth it using the spot pricing, so I used auto scaling groups and multiple availability zones, or whatever, and just use the spot pricing instances. And if AWS took the node back, too bad, those jobs got killed. Condor handled the jobs getting killed off and just rescheduled them.
Does everyone have a good idea of what Condor is here? I'm not sure how much that's a layperson thing.
It's a job batch processing scheduler for anybody who doesn't know what it is.
And something developed here at UW, I believe, right?
Yep, across the street from my building.
So Sarah just threw out a question in the chat saying, was this a test? Do you have plans to implement this for production?
I wish I could figure out how to open the chat window in this thing.
At the bottom, is there a chat button?
Oh, I see it now. Sorry, it's my first time using Zoom.
No.
It was just a test. We're doing some other stuff, like big scale processing like that we're testing now, but it's something that we're keeping in mind for if we ever need to get something processed quickly and our local cluster can't do it fast enough. It is an option to burst out. But considering we have 1,800 cores locally, we already paid for that. We might as well use that instead of spending a few $1,000s in AWS to reprocess it a couple days faster, unless we really need to.
Question about the differences or advantages versus, for example, Slurm.
I've only used Slurm a little bit here and there. In the end, they pretty much do the same thing. Just slightly different way of configuring it and running it, I think.
Yeah, is it kind of like?
I thought Slurm was used
And also, why would you not use
HPC environments
and another thing
and MPI type work? I think Condor can be used for that as well, but Condor is developed across the street from us, so we got to use it, and it's great.
I can quickly just chime in with a comment. If everybody can kind of manage their own mute, since we'll be open for everybody contributing and participating in today's conversation, mute when you're not talking, just to help control background noises, that'd be great.
Let's see, I think Laura and Michael can elaborate on the differences between HT Condor versus Slurm.
Which I'm only offering to do because I work in the center that produces Condor that's across the street from SSEC here. So Condor can do pretty much all the things that a lot of the HPC schedulers can do, like Slurm. It can work in a shared file system. It does not require, as I saw someone in the chat, it does not require that you bring everything with you. You can run Condor on a shared file system, standard, MPI capable HPC cluster. But what Condor can do is additionally give you the ability to have it schedule jobs across disparate sets of computers that are maybe even scheduled locally with something like Slurm. And that includes sending things out to the cloud, where you can have cloud instances wake up and join your Condor pool, making a request from your local Condor pool for those to do so. And then because Condor supports file transfer, it can move your data and software for jobs. So I added in our notes under UW-Madison that CHTC has several researchers actually who are doing this already. They submit to our Condor queue, which has a significant local capacity of servers, and then that user can say, add AWS instances that look like this just to run my jobs only, and shut them off under these conditions so that you're not wasting my money.
It's also probably worth mentioning that HT Condor has the Annex utility built in for actually doing that communication with AWS. My test I did, that feature was only in development, so I kind of DIY'd my own auto scaling groups and methods for scaling up in the cloud, so Condor didn't have to do it, but that is actually built in now, and I would like to go back and test that.
Great. Yeah, the other thing I would say about HT Condor, it's the scheduler that's used on the Open Science Grid, in part because of this file transfer capability, but it's also just from day one oriented toward high throughput computing. So it has really nice user interface features for submitting lots of jobs, like millions of jobs at once, without bringing the queue to a halt. And where the user can give a list of like an input file that varies with every job and have one submit file instead of needing to write many submit files or use a kind of restrictive array.
So Condor can burst to AWS, can it do Google Cloud too?
Working on that. AWS was first.
And then Jason Sims points out Slurm now can go to Google Cloud. Cool.
Yeah, I'd make note that here at Utah, we've actually been using Slurm's cloud kind of plugin for probably close to 3 years now. It's a little bit of a roll your own for the back end. We did it with an Emulab based resource here, but just as Jason noted, there's a nice article. I'll try to dig up the URL to this article that Slurm and Google Cloud has and put it into the chat in the document.
Any other questions about Condor or what Space Science Engineering Center is doing?
I saw a question from Sarah in the chat. Was there any noticeable lag with the burst to cloud storage? Yeah, there was a bit of lag. Everything was talking back through the VPN that was limited to a little over a gigabit to our local Ceph cluster. So we definitely noticed the network lag on jobs starting up. And, that was the main limit, was the network. And once we can work around that, which the campus is currently working on, it'd be better.
And that type of latency tends to matter less if your workload is in the form of lots of smaller tasks, because those individual task jobs would have to be increased in duration by a really significant amount to hurt your throughput if you've otherwise got hundreds of them running.
There's one question here. Is anyone using LSF If so, how significant? Seconds, minutes?
Sorry, just for clarification on that, that was about the significant was about the lag and the performance there.
Gotcha, thanks. Anything else you wanted to mention, Lauren?
I think that pretty much covers what I was describing. It's really nice that the admin can set this up for the user. So we do this on a per user basis. It's not like any user could just start using AWS. They talk to us, we set something up, but then they can initiate when they want to use the Amazon cloud, which is really nice. And how much Condor should allow Amazon to charge them effectively. And there are other controls too beyond like charging, but you can say, if none of my instances are matching any of my jobs for X duration of time, just shut them all down so that I know I'm not wasting my money. And to our knowledge, this is something I hear from the Condor developers, to our knowledge, this is the only sort of automated tooling for using something like AWS that gives the user that control. Because Amazon, of course, would love for your instances to keep running forever and ever. So nothing that they provide gives you that sort of control.
And Kevin, do you have anything to add or you want to bring up?
I don't think I have any else specific to my use case that I did, unless people have questions.
Okay. I think we're good to go. Let's see.
If I can jump back in and kind of fill in the parts that I didn't do when I dropped off and had to reboot my machine. So one, first in the notes down at the bottom of the document, I just added the link to the Slurm Google Cloud Platform document that I think is the same thing that was referenced earlier. It looks like Stephen added a link in the chat that we'll copy over into the document as well for an Azure document to kind of add that in. When Alan and I kind of talked about getting this thing going, he may have said some of this, so I apologize if I'm repeating. We kind of talked about what our doing looking into cloud. If you look at the document, I made a little mini outline. Alan added a bit for his site for things that kind of have us all, individually having these conversations. And it's more than just talking about how to burst our HPC type work out to the cloud, although that's definitely a slice of it. It's also kind of, the interest comes from having researchers show up either with software that's built to run in the cloud or because they have credits on some cloud service out there that they want to utilize, and they're looking to us to get assistance and guidance on that. Our director talks with us about being more informed on the cloud so that we can do things like, include the hybrid or, a cloud only kind of model in proposals, as well as just helping us with the technical understanding or successes others are having and how we can incorporate some of that on our own front. I often find myself rabbit trailing down, like maybe many of you do, on the technical worries of how to accomplish some of these lofty goals of like seamless bursting to the cloud, because my mind starts getting interesting directions about how seamless, what does that actually mean? And then I see notes in the comments talking about things related to accounting. How do you account for things? Is your cloud account a single account that multiple tenants are in, or are you doing an account per research group? Technical considerations about security, especially within businesses, BAAs with cloud providers if necessary. So this is just kind of a lot of the premise for what gets us kind of focused on things. As I noted earlier, we do have kind of an on-prem kind of cloud with the Emulab resource, but there's a lot we were able to kind of shortcut or kind of cheat on that because it's on campus. So we essentially extended VLANs into this cloud service. And so it's part of the cluster. So a lot of the things that people are bringing up out in the cloud, I haven't had to address yet. So that kind of sets the stage for why we're motivated to look into more about what others are doing with cloud, what the experiences they're having, and maybe a little bit of what we've done so far. That's kind of what I'd add in to kind of help us get going.
That sounds good. Let's see, Lauren, we had a question about financial model for users using the cloud queue.
Yes, and I answered. There is no cloud queue. It's more like a single queue on our local Condor pool. And Condor's Annex feature goes out and starts instances, and they wake up and join our local pool. And so for our users that are not relying on a local file system, which is most of them actually, Condor is doing file transfer and it can just run their jobs on AWS. We can do that to dynamically expand our local pool by our decision, but individual researchers can also spend their own money and have machines join our local pool, but with a control to make sure it only runs their jobs that are flagged a certain way.
Sounds good. Let's see, Jason. Oops. Resumption Murgy. Some cleaning. Yep, no, that sounds good. Brian, did you want to talk a little more on any of the Utah stuff?
I guess I would kind of throw out the question to just, again, solicit everybody to, feel free to unmute yourself, chime in, type it in the chat, however you'd like to. When I guess I'm looking at the cloud right now, there's the HPC burst, the HTC burst that I think we've been giving some good time to. What other usage cases are people doing, exploring or actively using? Maybe to kind of see what I mean by that is we were at a recent conference where we saw a nice presentation by a company called Rescale. Part of what they threw out there that was kind of intriguing is that they've kind of captured up their own version of a little web portal where a user comes in and instead of worrying about an HTC or an HPC type experience, they're looking more for an interactive experience based around a particular application. Maybe those applications are things you don't even have at your own site as a part of that service out there. So it's kind of an open door kind of question here. What other things are people doing with cloud? Where are they finding successes? This is really meant to be an open discussion today. We can go wherever anybody wants. Let me make one more little quick vote. Please control, your microphone, mute when you're not talking, unmute when you are, please.
Thanks. Is anyone using spot instances and or GPU burst? That's from Chris.
Yun Shen, can you please mute your microphone?
Okay, nothing on the spot instances.
This is Stephen Harrell. I actually have a question. So here, most of the cloud stuff that we're doing doesn't seem super financially viable, and most of it is driven by basically getting free credits. Where are people seeing that this is kind of a good situation when you take away the idea of opportunity cost? Because a lot of our opportunity costs, we have enough on-prem that there's not a ton of opportunity costs, I should say. So, of course, opportunity cost is a big thing for cloud, but where else is it valid anywhere else? I haven't figured that out yet.
So I can throw one example out here that one of our research groups here at Utah is doing on their own. So they own resources on our traditional HPC clusters, and they run their own work, but they're a genomics group, and some of the software that they're developing is something others are, collaborating with them on using as well. So one of the areas they've found a successful use of cloud is they've created their own Amazon instances where they can stand up an environment to handle one of these computational runs for running a few of the cases through. And they choose to do that for these, I guess I'll call them a third-party customer, their customers. And they do it not because it's necessarily a financial win, but because the costing model becomes actually simpler for them, because Amazon sends them a bill for what was used and they pass that bill on to what they would do to the customer. So it's a clean cut convenience, and it doesn't get in the way of their day-to-day operations that they're running on the resources they own on our HPC systems. All right, so there's some additional comments being put in the chat if you're following along. Bob asked about the MPI, high-speed multi-node in the cloud. There was note that Azure has InfiniBand available if you're choosing the right resources. David gave a URL to a document about some of these things. Let's get that document over into the Google Doc as well, so others can see it later.
So I can share our other cloud use case from SSEC that we're working on right now. Over the past year or so, we've really been cloudifying everything basically to run in Kubernetes. And the idea is our data center has maybe 15 minutes of UPS backup and no generator. And we're due to the work we do, we deliver level 2 cloud and aerosol products to NASA for distribution worldwide. We're contractually obligated to have stuff done in a certain amount of time. So any large, chilled water outage on our campus or anything that could bring down our processing in a data center is definitely high risk for us. So our plan is we're already almost got everything ready to run in Kubernetes, is to use the cloud as a backup system that's kind of running in parallel with our local system. Because we're constantly ingesting the satellite raw data, processing and sending it back to NASA. That's what we're working on now, is trying to get that up and running. And trying to be a cloud agnostic, so it could be AWS, Azure, Google, basically anybody who offers Kubernetes or some sort of VM that I can turn on Kubernetes and go.
Anyone have questions about that scenario? Using Kubernetes at all?
Kubernetes is great as long as you actually really need to use it in-house. Otherwise, it's not quite great and just a pain.
Are you just using that on a normal, maybe normal is the wrong word, but just a regular Linux platform, or are you using it on like a Cray or something like that?
Our Kubernetes, it just runs on CentOS.
Okay.
Bare metal cluster in our local data center.
Sure, sure.
Kevin, question is, what do you intend to use Kubernetes for, HPC, infrastructure, or both?
Right now it's infrastructure. We've basically migrated all of our Python services from running under supervisor or whatever was running them to run in containers in Kubernetes. So all of our APIs, websites, stuff like that. We're not really looking at it for HPC because Condor does such a good job of that. But I do think it'd be really cool to use the Kubernetes jobs and somehow like write a translator for, because we have a processing system that's specific to satellite data built on top of Condor. But to like build a translator into that system where instead of sending it to Condor, it can send it to Kubernetes, and then Kubernetes then schedules this container job, probably using more like Singularity to run on some worker nodes, kind of just like Condor, but through Kubernetes. I don't know if we'll ever do that, but that does sound like a fun use case.
So there was a question kind of asking about some of the differences between Kubernetes and Slurm. And I think there's many answers to this. I'll throw my kind of opinion out that kind of is, it was just being noted, Kubernetes is built for kind of orchestrating containers. And I'd kind of say its roots really come from the direction of cloud services. And maybe kind of, I'll throw the term a little bit kind of stateless focused cloud services, although that's a unfair conclusion on its own. So if you're standing up a front end, web portal to various things, I think you'll find an easier path for Kubernetes. But if you're looking for, the way that we're scheduling jobs traditionally in an HPC batch environment, there's a little bit of a gap between these two worlds that you have to figure out your own clever, approach for. We have a little bit of Kubernetes here running where we're doing Jupyter Hub through Kubernetes, and we're still trying to get our head wrapped around whether we love or don't love Kubernetes. It definitely is doing some things well, but it definitely adds some additional challenges that weren't there before.
Okay, does anyone else out there have any other kind of use cases about what you're doing?
I guess I'll throw out a question. It's a little bit seeded in my mind from the Rescale presentation I alluded to. When you're looking at a cloud service, obviously somebody had to give a credit card to get the account set up. So between Lauren's comments on things that are going on with the Condor and various other things, you can look at this from a sense where you have one account with multiple tenants, or you have an account per tenant. Has anybody kind of gotten anywhere where they have a working model that they find successful, whether or not they are using a central group's account and then recharging back out to subtenants, or are they finding it just easier to go and have their tenants each have their own account and function independently?
I can comment a little bit about intentions. It's not in production yet, but we're starting to pilot it. Is this coming through?
Yep.
Yeah, so we have a lot. Santa Barbara's trying to do a lot with bringing things together for scale for value. And so I know that the accounting people are working with AWS to introduce sort of a shared organization, and then to do it all through vendor blankets. I don't know if you guys have a concept of that in your accounting system, but here we have a concept of you can say, hey, I want to authorize a spend of up to a certain amount with a certain vendor. And so the hope is that the campus would create a relationship with AWS that kind of collected all these POs in one organization. Each group would have their own account that would then be funded through the vendor blanket. And so they could kind of run their own thing. They could also attach their individual credits. If they have credits, those could be attached to their account, but they would all accrue to the one organization, which then lets us negotiate discounts with Amazon based on our total overall spend. as opposed to doing it on the thing. It's not in production yet. We're still negotiating with AWS, as I understand, and I'm not running it. I'm hearing this as an early beta test customer, someone who would use it. That's the intention, but that's sort of the model that we're looking at, is something like that. The obvious downside and the risk that we're going to have to accept is coming up with a policy for what do you do when someone's vendor blanket runs out. The obvious solution for compute is just shut it off, but storage is more complicated. And I expect campus is going to accept some uncovered cost of keeping people's storage alive for some period of time after their blanket runs out, just to bridge people who need a week or two or miss out or something happens. But that's the model we're looking at and trying to execute. And so I thought I'd share it as something that if something that we're trying to get to. If we succeed and it works out, a year and a half from now, either I or hopefully someone in the central IT group that made it happen could give a summary at this or one of the other conferences.
So maybe a follow-up question, Ted, on that is, how much of this is then something you guys are having to brew on your own to handle all this accounting layer versus how much are the cloud providers, doing portions or large, chunks of that for you?
I'm not an expert in this. My understanding is that the organization and sort of the idea of having a bunch of accounts that are part of a single organization that can then sort of run it as a group, a bunch of VPCs, and sort of allow us to centralize the networking and some of those things that really make sense. Nobody wants every group on campus to be running their own VPN gateway at $40 a month, when we can just run one big common one for everybody and do it. And there's some support in that, technically, to get back to the technical stuff, with Transit Gateway and some of those things. I think that Amazon is willing to support it. The challenge and the interesting question there is that, and this is, I don't fully know, is I don't know how homogeneous the various R1 university accounting systems are. So Amazon may be willing to give us some help, but everybody has, at least as far as I've seen, everybody has, their own or uniquenesses of their own campus. We moved our purchasing to a SciQuest system that's kind of a software as a service thing. So there may be some opportunities for Amazon and SciQuest and 5 or 6 universities that all use the same thing to get together and work something out. But in the end, at some point, there needs to be our favorite, enterprise technology middleware that bridges university accounting systems and project codes and recharge and all that fun stuff to AWS. Here's a PO, go have fun.
Ted, is that just UC Santa Barbara or the whole UC system?
At the current time, I believe it's UC Santa Barbara, just kind of, this is part of our cloud strategy rollout. I believe at this time, the purchasing systems at each UC are separate and distinct, although it wouldn't surprise me if there's some parallels. But we do not, at this time, have a single UC-wide purchasing system like we just kind of rolled out for payroll and other stuff. You may have read about it in the news. It was very expensive. I know this is really boring accounting stuff and not the fun HPC stuff, but I thought I'd share.
No, this has been really good. Thanks for sharing.
Let's see.
So I guess I'll throw out kind of a question that touches a little bit on some partial answers I think that have been given, but for those who are using cloud in any form, whether it's the Condor approach or others, and we're dealing with the data staging, the ingress and the egress from the cloud, is anybody, what experiences can people share, both on performance, both on added surprise costs that may or may not be there? Data staging ideas, comments.
For SSECs bursting into the cloud, we staged all of our software and some of the ancillary data in the cloud on an NFS server, so we wouldn't have to talk back to our local network for that. Ingress is really not a concern as long as you have the bandwidth for it. It's free, so it doesn't matter. I mentioned how there was the limit on the VPN. You can get around that by just, if you have on a university and you have a large pipe out of your building, you could just do public access to your data if you can somehow make it publicly available. And then it can pull it that way instead of through the VPN to get a higher ingress rate into the cloud for HTC processing. Egress wasn't much of a concern for us because we picked network light, compute heavy jobs for our test. And even if it was network heavy, it would have chewed up some of our budget for the cloud, but not too much. Internet 2 has some decent deal with AWS around egress costs.
Yeah, the egress is a big consideration for AWS in particular. Our users who are sending things to AWS are doing stuff like machine learning, sometimes on GPUs, where they might have a really large input data set, but their output is pretty small. So this is one of the things that I think works against AWS for simulations that are frequently executed in an MPI context, because frequently the outputs of those are really large and the inputs are really tiny.
We've had a few people make comments that, and I don't know how prevalent this is, but that some communities are successfully getting Amazon or other cloud providers willing to host, common data sets that are attractive for large communities. And then that kind of at least takes that portion out of the equation of having to carry that in on your own or carry it out. Has anybody else been involved or had experience with petitioning a cloud provider to host public data sets?
Only secondhand, really, but I do know of large projects that use Condor in various ways, which is why we know about them, that are working directly with Amazon to make their data access, to create data repositories in Amazon. And they're doing it partially to get around the fact that they'd have to charge to pull that data out otherwise. So they have their jobs put the data into this data repository in Amazon, and then they have other things that go and pull that data where Amazon has made it basically free for anybody to pull the data from that data set. I won't name names, but there are organizations doing this.
So I guess throwing one more question out. This is a little bit about the BAA direction or any other agreements people are needing to have with their cloud providers. And I'll kind of allude to something that's been going on here on our campus. I believe through the Board of Regents, there was a decision made that certain intellectual property on the campus now needs to be more protected. And the wording is a little bit loose, at least the way we've been discussing it, where one could kind of think intellectual property of research might get considered for this. And so it kind of brings up these questions of what are others finding out about working with their host institution and the cloud providers to put any of this together, and maybe Lauren, maybe you have a greater perspective there from the Condor side, where you have lots of other remote constituents as well. That so it's kind of open can to do anyway. However anybody wants to maybe throw out some ideas on this.
I will say if there is interest, because we've had some questions about Condor and what we do locally. If anybody wanted UW-Madison to talk about how we're set up with Condor, how we allow users to send jobs to many places beyond our local resources, I imagine that's something we could wrangle pretty easily. But I also don't want to dominate any of that conversation if there are others who have Condor instances for a joint topic call.
So I see a kind of a response from Chris about a BAA between ASU and AWS taking a significant amount of time. Would you be willing to kind of talk about any of the challenges it took to put that together?
Yeah, absolutely. So the biggest problem is that the lawyers at ASU were unfamiliar with how AWS does business, and the lawyers at Amazon were unfamiliar about how a university works. And so there was lots of discussion between them about, oh, wait, you do that? Oh, that type of just not understanding the other's perspective. And it just took a lot of time. Obviously, when you get lawyers involved, everybody wants to grind things to a halt. So it just took a significant amount of time to redline documents and go back and forth and getting AWS to Amazon to understand that we have state wording that is required, and we have federal wording that is required, and we have BAA wording that's required, and we have research wording that's required, that they were just not as familiar with that process as we had hoped. But we eventually ended up working with, I believe, somebody specifically at Amazon in their legal department who was more familiar with BAAs, and that it finally happened. It just took a long time for all the lawyers to do all their lawyer things.
So in the end, were there specific technical things that had to be changed, adjusted, or was it more just making everybody understand the language barrier between the?
It was the latter. It was really making them understand what we were asking for and what we were planning on putting. Because immediately the reaction of ASU's lawyers was, no, absolutely not. Don't do anything. No. And then we explained what we were doing. And we don't have any specific use cases for HIPAA-related data yet, but we knew that they were coming, and the central IT office is trying to move everything to the cloud. So we knew this was coming, and it was more, we know that we're going to have to cross this bridge eventually, and we might as well start the process early. And so that's worked out quite well. Our sister university, University of Arizona, and I don't know if Jeremy or any of his people are on, have a working HIPAA compliant environment in AWS that they've actually offered to extend to us because we're all under the same board of regents. So we haven't actually pursued anything yet, but we know that we're going to at some point. So it made sense to do that in parallel. And it was University of Arizona that has a running HIPAA environment in AWS. I believe it's technically in GovCloud, but they were willing to extend that to us. We're we meet with them regularly. But I don't know if anybody from U of A is on the call, but they could talk about that specifically.
Also, one thing I'm curious about is there's several initiatives happening around UW-Madison, and one was pushing more research data to the cloud in some way, shape, or form. Or actually, well, possibly, but probably. I don't know if anyone else is in that boat where they're trying to provide solutions for researchers, and so giving them large amounts of disk space somewhere probably in the cloud.
Could you repeat that question? I'm sorry, I got distracted and I think I may have a response.
Okay, I mean, they're looking to spend, one of the initiatives, it seems like they're going to be spending a lot of money to provide storage space for research data. And that I'm thinking is looking like they're going to want to move that to the cloud in some way, shape, or form. It's kind of up in the air right now. No solid proposal, but I don't know if anyone out there has been doing that, moving more research data to the cloud and using some solution there.
Storage has been the bane of us for a while. Our researchers, as we tried to go into the cloud, storage was one of those costs that just kind of blew their mind. They weren't prepared for it. So we're looking to do more hybrid as we can, just because the researchers, I don't think, at least aren't at, most of them aren't at a maturity level yet to have budgeted for what's required.
Yeah, I think the budgeting part is kind of like what's driving this. We're offering, 5 terabytes of free disk space. Is something that you can give a majority of researchers without sweating it and without them having to worry about it. But I don't know how that's going to work out.
Yeah, we're doing a decent amount of research storage in the cloud, I put in quotes, but it's all backup or really small stuff. We use and abuse Google Drive for easily 50 or 60 T, and Google just gives it away. But we understand that, return to service and restores and all that stuff is just a big giant question mark, but you can't be free. And that's all for sort of medium-sized storage. If it's small scale, we just give it to them like you guys do, 5T or 2T or whatever on existing infrastructure that we've scrounged up money for. But then in the medium scale, tens to 100 and so T, it's usually local storage that they buy commodity stuff that we point them to at the when they have startup money, and then we push a second copy. We make them buy 2, and then we make a third copy into Google Drive just to abuse it. We've had a couple faculty get big data sets and be like, well, we don't really need it, so can you just shove it in the cloud? But it's still all on the Google Drive stuff. I know there are a couple of other departments here that have been playing around with storage gateway and kind of trying to push stuff there, but that's usually in organizations that have a little bit more central funding, a little bit more money. And then at the big scale, anything over 100 T, it's just non-feasible unless it's the classic AWS Glacier workflow: write once, read never. I think that's pretty much it, but who knows? I mean, if someone else can figure out how to do cloud storage without it costing an arm and a leg. Commodity storage at this scale is just so cheap.
Thank you for that. Anything else you want to touch on, Brian?
No, I'd just say that I've captured the couple future meeting topics that I heard floated around. There was Condor, potentially a single site kind of talking about it, or maybe a hybrid of multiple sites talking about it. There was the HIPAA in the cloud, maybe reaching out to University of Arizona, seeing if they would be willing to present on what they've done. Am I missing anything from a possible future topic that somebody else thinks we need to add to the list from today's conversation?
Yeah, one thing is just sort of throw it out there. If anybody had, and I just said this in chat, if anybody has a multi-university or a university system Globus contract, I would love to chat with them. So if it's like, you know, 2 sister universities, or like theoretically, I've heard the Carnegie model or University of California systems. Anybody who's doing anything like that, I would love to have a discussion with them. And Cliff, I will see if I can put you in touch with Jeremy at U of A.
Great. I'm actually happy to talk to you about Globus because we're in the middle of our BA negotiations right now.
Okay, that would be really useful. I'll touch base with you on both of those.
Great.
Also, you can contact me at Ohio Supercomputer Center, it's Karen Tomko, and I will forward you to the people who've worked with Globus on our contract recently.
And that was Karen?
Karen Tomko at Ohio Supercomputer Center.
Okay, awesome.
Chris, you might also get a good response from people if you sent an email to the Systems-Facing list, which anybody can do. Anybody who's on that list can send an email, and then you might hit some more people who weren't able to join today.
Good call.
I'm curious if anybody is on from IT for Cornell on this call. Because I know at the IT at Cornell University, they have this thing called Data Storage Finder. Has anyone looked at that before? I've done some more investigation. It's a Drupal app, but it's supposed to go through and try to help people determine their storage needs and how their storage should be utilized in part of their research data management. So I'm just wondering how many people that are having these issues, if this is tied to their research data management services, their HPC services. I mean, it's more of a much larger picture than just our HPC or research computing. So I know UD at this point is also going to put a contract in with Globus as well to meet a component for expanding our network and upgrading our network and connecting to NiserNet and a bunch of things. And we're still on the storage piece, still working that out. So I don't think this is something that's not everybody's heart, but as far as the storage is concerned. But I was just wondering if there's anybody else that has looked at some type of way of helping people figure out what they need to do for their storage, and then backfilling it with the services such as cloud or local clouds or archiving.
Can you repeat again what the system Cornell's using, or?
Sure. What I'm going to do is just very quickly share my screen, if that's okay. This is the Data Storage Finder tool, and it's based on Drupal. So basically, when you get started and you click on this option, it starts to tell you the detailed storage options. So, when I click on this tool, then it comes down here and it says, describe your data. And they have all these questions here, which I think is really a great idea. Unfortunately, it's in Drupal. We don't use Drupal, but somebody else is looking at some other possible tools and then retrofitting them in for the University of Delaware. And I think this is a really great idea, and it would be nice if there was something generic that we had. But this is what we're looking at to try to move towards, because I think for our researchers, especially with us trying to expand our research, we're an R1 university, but we don't have a huge research support group at this point. We're basically, two people, myself and another person that's for systems. And, we're looking to expand that. But at this point, it's more trying to figure out what are the best ways to direct people. And then also that helps us to define what types of services we need to put in place. You can stop sharing if you want. I'll just copy this link right here, and I'll put this in chat.
Thank you. That looks fantastic. What is your name again? I'll probably follow up with you.
Sorry, I wasn't logged into my Zoom profile, and so it's Anita Schwartz. I'm the campus champion for the University of Delaware.
Thank you. That looks fantastic, though.
And thanks, Ted, for posting the GitHub. That's where the next thing I was going to do. That's at the bottom of the link on the page. So thank you.
Okay. We're after 1 o'clock here, so anyone have any parting thoughts here? Okay, I think that'll wrap it up. Brian, you have anything to end with here?
No, I just appreciate everybody joining us and contributing to the conversation today.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next month.
Hey, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.